Hello, we are Svetlana Maximova, Daria Melchenko, and Oksana Nayanzina from the Altai State University. We are happy to be a part of EduHam conference and would like to present our research, the subjective assessment of social risks and vulnerability of labor migrants in Russian borderland. Immigration to Russia is an inevitable long-term trend. With the foreign-born population approaching 9%, Russia has the second-largest stock of migrants in the world after the USA. Official statistical data indicate persistent migration inflows, attaining about 15 million of people. The main streams consist of citizens from countries members of the CIS, that is largely due to Eurasian integration process. The major part of migrants are citizens of Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan and China. Every year, over hundreds of thousands of foreign citizens require and receive Russian citizenship, obtain permits for temporary residence, gain work permits. The recent political decisions of the Russian government are aimed to enhance attractiveness of the Russian Federation for international migrants, improve statistical reporting, enlarge legal space for temporary migration and regulation of the status of illegal migrants, stimulate highly skilled migrants. During past years, several measures were implemented to ensure social integration and adaptation of migrants, allowing them to learn Russian language, history and bases of law, obtain information about cultural traditions of Russian peoples, receive legal support, vocational training, but there are still many problems related to the regulation of migration process. Border regions are more severely impacted by international migration costs of border crossing and primary adaptation of migrants. Unfortunately, contemporary state of migration situation doesn't permit to make full use of its opportunities and benefits, both for migrants and receiving regions. It is associated with risks and vulnerabilities. Effective migration policy needs evidence-based researches to describe qualitative and quantitative components of migration. The purpose of the study consisted in examination of subjective views, attitudes, and evaluations related to migrants' risks and vulnerabilities from both parties involved in the process, local population on the one hand and migrants on the other. Research tasks were as follows: to obtain the subjective assessments of the character of migration situation in the region, predominance and intensity of migration flows, risks and opportunities of migration by population; to analyze general attitudes of population towards migrants and its support for regulation measures; to analyze assessment of migrants' social well-being, their relations with local population and diasporas, authorities and public institutions as indicators of the risk. Our analysis has shown that people living in the Altai region are rather unconcerned by international migration problems and describe the regional migration situation as calm and unproblematic. About 20% of respondents reported about vigorous inflows of foreign migrants, 13% about multiple inhabitants from other regions different by their language and culture. Considering weak economic position of the region and acute problems of depopulation, it was significant that 35.6% of people have noted that there is a great out-migration to other regions of Russia or other countries. Indeed, recent statistical data show that only in 2016 the population lost in the Altai region was about 6,000 people, especially due to exchange with other Russian regions. International migration growth had only partially re-established the population balance. Since the population didn't perceive the migration situation as threatening, the majority reported about positive feelings and attitudes they have towards international migrants. 43% and 27% of respondents have noted that they had rather positive or friendly attitude towards foreign workers, whereas 24% had rather negative and 6% strongly negative attitude. Meanwhile, answering questions about presence of guest workers on Russian labor market, 87.4% agreed with the statement that Russia should prepare its own specialists instead of paying migrants. About half of respondents, 46.5%, supported the idea of restricting access for foreign citizens in their place of residence. Only 34% of participants expressed disagreement with restrictive measures. Even if most respondents were not opposed to migrants as such, they believed that the government should be favorable to young and skilled migrants and restrict the entry to disabled or low-educated people, stimulate return migration of Russian and Russian-speaking population rather than to other nationalities. More than a quarter of participants supported integrative migration policies tending to attract and support first and foremost fellow countrymen of different ethnicities living in the new states of the former Soviet Union. Almost the same proportion of respondents indicated that the government should support all who want to arrive in the Russian Federation to take up permanent residence. Addressing issues of illegal migration, 60% of respondents argued for forced deportation of illegals from CIS countries, and only 23% allowed for possibility of their legalization, help for finding a work and acculturation in Russia. During the research, the respondents were asked to assess the set of statements about positive and negative impacts of international migration and risk that migrants take during their stay in Russia. The extent of agreement was assessed by 10-point scales. Then answers were regrouped in three categories: low values of consent, middle values, and high values. Among possible opportunities of international migration, the most important for population were those related to economic advantages, especially fast and cheap work done by migrants, and the possibility to ensure the need in low-qualified labor force. Ideas about growing cultural diversity and enhancement of interethnic communication were not much appreciated, as well as the statement that migration could make up shortfalls in highly qualified specialists. The analysis of negative effects has led to a conclusion about alarmist and highly biased representations of population about migration. 43% of respondents agree that migration leads to a deterioration of security situation. 42% that migrants increase tension on the labor market. Over a third thought that migrants are blurring traditional Russian culture and way of life. The most important thing is that only 11% of respondents agreed that migrants are socially excluded, have limited rights and freedoms, or discriminated. And what do migrants themselves think and feel? One of the most important indicators of migrant social well-being is subjective perception of safety and absence of threat to the life and health. Answering question, in what extent do you feel safe in Russia? More than half of migrants have reported that they feel absolutely safe. About 40% reported about rather good safety. 88% had never faced violence or nationalism. The level of satisfaction with different facets of the life was high as well. 84.6% of guest workers were highly satisfied with family relations, 72.8% with relationships with colleagues, 67.6% with their work, 66.4% with their life and home, 65.2% with their health. The lowest levels were identified regarding the support of national associations and religious community. Relationships with the local population were also assessed as rather peaceful and friendly. Negative attitudes were mentioned by 13%. The majority of respondents have noted that they believe in mutual understanding and cooperation between natives and newcomers. Notwithstanding these good relations with local community and desire to integrate into Russian society, the significant part of newcomers, especially those who work temporarily and don't want to stay in Russia for a long period of time, try to keep their own cultural identity and social connections without creating new bonds of preferences. They are more glad to be in the company of people only from their homeland, have best friends only there, celebrate holidays and prepare foods, think and act according only to their national mentality. When responding to the survey, migrants have highly assessed their trust towards family and friends, whereas evaluations of trust towards local authorities and communities were somewhat discrete. 61.4% trusted their employer, 54.4% the mission of the country, or 47.5% migration centers and services, 43% police and law enforcement agencies. Almost the same level of trust was observed regarding to ethnic diasporas and public associations protecting the migrants' rights. Most migrants have noted that they rarely ask for help from their countrymen and ethnic diaspora. Only 37.6% said yes. In case where it occurs, these connections are used for receiving help concerning adaptation to new conditions of life, knowledge about country rules of behavior, registration and receiving permits from authorities, search for employment, financial aid, education of children, and resolution of problems and conflicts related to promotion, payment, etc. So, we can conclude that given that migration situation in the border region, in the Altai region had quite a non-problematic character, the Soviet population and migrants reported about friendly attitudes towards each other. Migrants' risks and vulnerabilities were assessed as minor. Meanwhile, considering biased and limited representations of population about migration focused largely on disadvantages and problems of adaptation migrants, threats for national security, we can conclude that migrants' risks, especially related to confrontation with local population, have hidden character and might become apparent. So we need weighted and well-elaborated measures in the field of national and migration policy to promote changes in public conscience and increase trust towards states and public institutions involved in the process of migration regulation.